This is part 4 of the Doritos commercial sting creation in After Effects. In previous installments we've created the movement of our text, we've created a mask around our triangle which animates, we've created some basic particles with multiple effects including a glow effect, radial blur and light rays. You will need to adjust these as you go, and I suggest creating them and moving them back and forwards and adjusting certain things. So one of the things I might look at doing, for example, is in my glow radius, maybe changing up some of the instances here. So maybe dropping down my glow threshold and checking the effect. I'm going to take mine down to about 30, 35, something like that, and it's got a nice little more of a glowing effect there. Play around with the radius as well, and you may also want to play around with the intensity accordingly, so you might need to make it more localized. So if it is becoming too over the top or too underwhelming, you can change it. As we start adding more things, we may again need to change these out here. So let's have a look at some of the other things that we may need to change. I'm going to take this sparks layer that we've just created and I'm going to drop this below our original animation here. So this is the one that we're copying, and let's have a look at some of the other things that we're looking at here. In the background there is a slight bit of cloud movement. It's quite subtle, but it's a nice effect that's hopefully going to make our project look a little bit better. And in fact, if we have a look where the glowing sections of the video are, particularly here, you can see there is kind of a cloud effect as the light starts affecting that. So let's see if we can't create something that's going to look fairly similar to this. Let's turn that off. And I'm going to create a new layer for this. So once again, we go to Layer, New, Solid. Let's rename this Clouds and hit Enter. There is our clouds layer. And to make the clouds, what we need to do is we need to go to Effects. We're going to go to Noise and Grain. And remember, all these are alphabetical. And then go to Fractal Noise. And there we have a very interesting looking cloud effect. There are a whole lot of different types of fractal noise we can apply to here. Turbulent, smooth, dynamic, swirly, and I suggest you play around with some of these. You might find something that's going to work really well. I'm going to keep mine to basic. You can also choose to invert them if need be and play around with that sort of thing here. I'm going to scale mine up, so I'm going to go to Transform and I'm going to scale this up. It's currently 100%. I want to make these nice and big, less detail overall, but I don't want the clouds to be the main thing. If they're quite small, you'll tend up getting more sort of variances and stuff. So I'm going to scale this up. Great. Now if I hit the space bar, they're kind of static, so it's not very exciting as far as clouds go. We may want to see some movement into this. So one of the best techniques for doing this is get your timeline to the beginning right at the beginning from the playhead, and we're going to go to evolution. So I'm just going to make sure we've got that showing here, evolution, and there is a turn dial here. Now if I turn this, you can actually see the clouds will appear to sort of shift. So I'm going to animate this. I'm going to hit the stopwatch right at the beginning. I'm going to move my timeline to the end, and I'm going to rotate or change the numbers in here. So if I click and scroll, it will bring up a number, or you can manually type in. So I'm going to type in 3, and let's see how this looks. So the spacebar. It's still a little bit quick, so I'm going to make this a little bit more subtle. I'm going to bring it back to the beginning. I'm going to make sure my evolution starts at 0 and 0. Move it to the end, and let's drop this down to maybe 2 and 0. And that might work. I might just change it to something even less. Let's try about 1. So that's 1 rotation, and there's a nice bit of subtle movement there. Now I do recommend playing around with variations on this, but for now let's keep it simple, and you can always play around with them later. Now these clouds aren't very exciting at the moment. There's a bit of movement. I don't want them to be exciting, but the color's definitely not quite there. So let's look at doing that. One of the best techniques for changing color in something like clouds is using what we call a tritone effect. So to bring this up, let's minimize our fractal noise. Drop down. Let's go to Effect. Let's go to Color Correction. And towards the bottom, alphabetically, is tritone. In the tritone effect, we have the option of changing the colors of the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. And let's do that. The highlights are quite bright at the moment. In our video, everything's kind of dark. There's a lot of reds happening there. So I'm going to click on that, and I do want to go for sort of maybe a reddy, browny color for there. Midtones. I'm also going to go for a sort of even a darker color there. And it's just a matter of playing around. So I'm going to change my brightness a little bit, my midtones, maybe add a little bit more red into those. The shadows I'm going to leave it at black, and then we can see we've sort of got a nice sort of reddy orangey color. And again, play around with these accordingly. Great. Now let's place this where it's going to be more effective. So in our timeline layer here, these clouds are at the top. Not really where we need them to be. So I'm going to click on those, and I'm going to drag those all the way to below everything except for the black solid layer, which was our background. The black solid layer is effectively useless now, so you may wish to delete that because the clouds now form that background. And there's our Doritos and our cloud background. Again, if you do want to adjust the colors of this, now that you've put it in place, you can jump in and start moving these around, and maybe you're going to find something that's going to be a little bit more effective and perhaps allow us to see the background a bit better. The other thing you're going to notice is this spark effect is going to start picking up on the colors of the clouds a little bit more as well. And in fact, while we're here, let's move that spark to behind the text but above the triangle, so that it's not going to be affecting the text as much. So what this means is we may need to go back into our sparks, go into our particles, our glows, our blurs, our light rays, and just start playing around with those. While we're here, let's see if we can create a vignette effect, and this is mainly for our cloud layer. So to do this, I'm going to create another layer. So I'm going to go Layer, New, Solid. I'm going to rename this Vignette, but you can call it something that's going to be appropriate for yours. It's going to create a black solid. Now I do have mine below the text layers, which is going to be fine for me. I'm also going to drag it below the sparks layer, and below the triangle layer, because I only really want it to cover the clouds. There's my clouds there. To create a vignette, I'm going to use what they call a gradient map. So I'm going to go to Effect, Generate, Gradient Map. This creates a gradient from dark to light. We can adjust this by changing the start of the ramp, and there's our start color, which is black. We can also change the end, which is down here at the moment, and the end color is white. We also have the shape as set to linear ramp. Now I actually want this to be not a linear ramp, but a radial ramp. And we can see here's the dark color as the start, and it is radiating out circular to that. So I'm going to move the start of that to essentially the center of my logo. It's now going from a black center out to a white outside. I want to swap this over, so I'm going to go swap colors, and now it is white heading out to black. I can change the end of the ramp and move that out if I wish, or move it in accordingly. And as it is a radial, wherever the center is, that's where it's going to stretch out from. I'm going to bring this in a little bit more, and I'm going to leave it there for now. So here's my vignette layer. What I'm going to need to do now is change the blend mode of this. Remember, this is still stepping above the clouds, and I actually want this vignette to affect the clouds. Over here to the right, we have the option of mode, and once again make sure that this is visible by making sure this central button is pressed. I'm going to change the mode from normal to multiply, and that is going to create a nice vignette. The darker colors are going to come in, but it's still going to allow the lighter colors through, so the lighter parts of the circle. I can, if I jump back into my options for this vignette and go to end of ramp, you can see I can start stretching and moving out how that affects. Now the other interesting thing is we can animate all of these effects as well. So this might be something you want to animate. So as the spark starts, perhaps we start in quite close. We can just go and hit the stopwatches for start of ramp and end of ramp. As it expands and moves, we can start dragging this out, and we can maybe start seeing more of the screen. And more of the cloud effects. Till eventually we get to the end. And we may want to start maybe ramping this back down. Another interesting thing to maybe consider is also animating the starting point. So the start point, rather than having it in the center, we may wish to have it following the spark. So I'm going to find out where my spark is going and move that across. So it's going to give more effect to the clouds as we go, based on what is being made visible in that area. And there we have it. Key things to remember is that each of these effects may need to be adjusted. They may need to be animated. For example, this end part is definitely way too bright for how we need it. So do have a play around with animating and varying your different effects. You may find something that works even better, or something that's more subtle. And if you need to create multiple effects, I'd suggest that you probably try it out and see how it goes. Remember, most effects need to be created on a new layer, so layer, new, solid. Once the effect is applied, the solid layer will become invisible and the effects will become apparent over the top.